They laughed when I pulled up in that dented pickup, laughed like my presence was a punchline to a joke only they understood. What they didn't know was that inside that hangar sat a $65 million 0-cent jet with a fatal flaw no one else could see, and I was the only thing standing between them and a headline they couldn't spin. They saw grease-stained hands. What they didn't see was the engineer who designed the system they were about to die in. They saw a black mechanic. What they didn't see was a man whose ideas had been stolen, buried, and branded with another man's name. This wasn't just a repair job, it was a reckoning. And by the time the truth hit the boardroom, some of the same people who mocked me would be begging to keep their jobs. Or their lives. But first, leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. I didn't need to see their faces to feel the stares. Those tinted VIP windows did little to hide the disbelief, the disdain, the same cocktail of expressions I'd seen too many times before. Men in $5,000 suits watching like they'd just spotted a housefly on a wedding cake. My old F-150 rumbled across the tarmac like a challenge, toolbox clanking in the back, paint chipped like it had survived a war. I stepped out and grabbed a handle, and that's when I caught the soundbite that would have broken lesser men. "This the expert?" one of them muttered. "Thought we asked for the best, not some guy who looks like he came from a tire shop." I didn't look up. I didn't have to. Those words, they've been thrown at me since trade school. I just add them to the pile. What they couldn't see beneath the calluses and oil stains were the patents, the awards, the systems I'd built from the ground up. What they didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that I had built the very lungs of the jet they were too incompetent to diagnose. A young runway supervisor approached me, clipboard trembling like it knew better. "Mrs. Evans' jet needs to take off in 2 hours. Our techs haven't figured it out. If you don't find the problem soon, we're calling in the Atlanta team." His voice tried to sound firm, but it didn't reach past the shallow respect he'd been taught to ration. I nodded once and walked toward the jet. That's when I heard the voice that cut through everything like a scalpel, precise, no wasted syllables. "Let him work." The silence that followed was immediate. Alexandra Evans had stepped onto the tarmac. 43. CO. The kind of woman who didn't walk. She arrived. Navy blue suit. Heels that didn't slow her down one bit, and a look in her eye like she didn't just own the jet, she owned the silence. She didn't glance at the suits. "Just me. How long will it take?" she asked. "Depends on the problem," I answered. "Steady. Hour," she said, looking at her diamond-studded wristwatch. "Impress me." I opened the access panel like I'd done 100 times before. Didn't rush, didn't flinch, and in less than a minute, I saw what none of their certified boys could figure out. It wasn't a blown fuse or a faulty switch. It was a full-on pressurization failure hiding behind a cascade of false diagnostics. A flaw that would have turned that jet into a coffin at 45,000 feet. That plane wasn't glitching. It was suicidal. My hands moved on instinct, like they had muscle memory for catastrophe. I'd rebuilt systems like this in my sleep. Those other guys had been poking around like it was a vending machine that ate their dollar. I treated it like a defibrillator. Because lives were on the line, even if no one had bothered to say it out loud. And the whole time I felt her watching me through the glass. Not with suspicion. Not with pity. With something else. Recognition. 30 minutes later, I closed the panel, clean, secure. The job was done. I wiped my hands on the same cloth I'd carried since my first week in the field, a rag stained with years of doing things right while being told I didn't belong. I packed my tools like always, slow and quiet, like a man who knows excellence isn't plausible unless you look like them. I was halfway to my truck when I heard her again. "Come with me." She was standing there alone. No clipboard carriers, no advisors, just her. And she wasn't thanking me. She was opening a door, not to a handshake, but to something none of them were ready for, and neither was I. The hallway to Alexandra Evans' office didn't feel like it belonged to the same building as the hangar. It was quiet in a way only money can buy. Polished floors, art you don't understand but costs more than your house, lighting that whispered instead of buzzing. She didn't say a word as we walked. Didn't look back to see if I was following. She already knew I would. The door to her office slid open with a hiss, and suddenly I was in the kind of room where decisions are made that never show up on meeting agendas. She moved behind her desk, clean, sharp lines, real wood, no clutter, and gestured for me to sit across from her. I didn't, not yet. "Name?" she asked finally. "Marcus Jennings," I said. She began typing. Her fingers didn't hesitate, but her eyes, when they paused mid-setch, told me she'd found something that knocked the breath out of her logic. She didn't speak right away, just stared at the screen like it had said something personal. Then she leaned back and said it slowly, like she needed to hear it out loud to believe it. "Marcus Jennings. MJ." Her eyes narrowed, not in doubt, but in focus. "MJ," she repeated, turning the letters over like a key in a lock. The initials on the original G7 pressurization schematics. I didn't blink. She kept going. "You weren't just part of the solution. You built the system they broke. You designed the heart of our fleet's altitude integrity, and no one told me it came from a man who parks in gravel." I shrugged. "Wasn't in the brochure." She tilted her head, as if trying to reconcile the data on her screen with the man in front of her who smelled like jet fuel and patience. "They told me that system was engineered by Richard Hastings and his team," she said. "And yet," her voice trailed off, but I knew what came next. Truth always finishes its own sentence. She reached into a drawer, pulled out a thick folder, and placed it between us. "Here," she said, opening it. "Internal records, development files, legal filings, every last one of them signed by Hastings as the lead." She flipped to the final schematic page and tapped her finger on the initials. "MJ. You know how much this system has saved us in operating costs?" she asked, not looking up. 23% in fuel, 31% in maintenance, over $400 million in total value. That's your math, isn't it? I nodded once, down to the decimal. She finally looked up. "You've never spoken up." I let the silence answer her. She already knew why. No one hires a black engineer from the suburbs to lead a development team. They let him run diagnostics, maybe tighten bolts, but when the breakthroughs come, the credit slips right up the chain like steam through a vent. She exhaled and pushed the folder aside. "What happened?" I asked. "To the original submission?" Her expression hardened. 3 days after your files were uploaded, HR received a recommendation for dismissal, technical incompetence, from Hastings. I smiled without smiling. Poetic, isn't it? She leaned back in her chair and studied me again, like she was starting to understand the difference between what her company looked like on paper and what it had actually been doing behind closed doors. "System," she said, almost to herself. "It changed the trajectory of our entire fleet. And you've been fixing jets like it was your only option." "It was," I said. "Mechanics have bills to pay. Engineers just get erased." She was quiet for a moment, then slid another folder across the desk. This one was thinner, newer. "We're going to make this right," she said. "Retroactive recognition, royalties, and a position, Director of Innovation. The job you were supposed to have 5 years ago." I didn't reach for the folder, just met her eyes. "You sure the board's ready for a black mechanic to walk in and start running the department he used to mop?" "They won't have a choice," she said. "Not when they see what's coming." I chuckled once, not because it was funny, because it was surreal. After years of swallowing injustice whole, suddenly someone was offering me a seat at a table I wasn't even allowed to clean. "I'm listening," I said, "but I'm not signing anything until I see all the cards." Before she could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Too fast, too loud. Alexandra didn't flinch. "Come in," she said flatly. The door opened, and there he was. Hastings. Still buttoned up, still smug, but with a new layer of tension tightening his face. His eyes landed on me like I'd farted in his boardroom. "What's he still doing here?" he asked, trying and failing to keep the edge out of his voice. Alexandra didn't answer right away. Neither did I. The question wasn't meant to be answered. It was meant to reassert control, only this time, control had left the building and taken the schematics with it. Hastings didn't bother hiding his contempt. He strode into the office like he owned the oxygen and was personally offended I was breathing it. "Alexandra, the board's waiting on the call. We don't have time for side conversations with contractors," he said, eyes locked on me like I was a fly in his Chardonnay. I didn't move, didn't flinch. I'd seen that look before. From professors who thought I didn't belong, from hiring managers who told me my resume was impressive for someone like you. But Alexandra didn't blink. She stayed calm, cold even. "We're discussing intellectual property," she said evenly, her voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. That made him pause, just a blink too long. She turned her screen toward him, tapping a schematic with her index finger. "You recognize this?" she asked. He leaned in, his jaw tightening. The page showed the G7 system, the crown jewel of their fleet's efficiency, initialed plainly at the bottom corner, MJ. "Marcus Jennings," she said aloud, then leaned back like she'd just served the final dish at a very long dinner. "This is the man who built what you claimed as your own?" He opened his mouth, probably to deny, deflect, discredit, but before a word left his lips, the office door clicked open again. This time, it wasn't bluster that walked in. It was precision. Dr. Sophia Chun, Evans Aerospace's chief legal officer, stepped through the doorway with a leather briefcase so thick it could double as a shield. She nodded once to Alexandra, then to me, then turned and locked her eyes on Hastings, like she'd been waiting for this moment her entire career. "Apologies for the interruption," she said crisply, "but I wanted to be here in person. I've just completed a full audit of the IP registry and internal development files." She placed a thick file on Alexandra's desk with the weight of finality. The original submission for the G7 system was uploaded by Marcus Jennings under Employee ID MJ279 with matching digital fingerprints and metadata, confirmed and time-stamped. Hastings turned pale. Not the embarrassed kind. The kind of pale that comes from watching your empire split at the seams. "There must be some mistake," he said too quickly, voice now thinner, breath catching. "Marcus was just an assistant. He couldn't have authored the whole thing." Sophia didn't even look at him. And yet, he did. Alexandra gave him a moment to stew in the silence. Then she reached into another drawer and pulled out a second file. "Richard, would you like to explain why you recommended Marcus's termination 3 days after he submitted those designs?" she asked, sliding the HR email across the desk like it was Exhibit A in a murder trial. His eyes darted, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. That was performance-based," he stammered. Was struggling to integrate into the team. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "We have internal evaluations showing the opposite. In fact, he'd solved 3 subsystem failures no one else could crack in less than 6 weeks. Hastings tried to recover, puffing himself up. "Maybe," he contributed, in some small way, "but the system was finalized under my leadership." Alexandra turned her tablet around again. "Leadership doesn't mean erasing fingerprints and rewriting history." Then Sophia added the nail in the coffin. "We also found similar cases, 7, in fact, over the past decade. Black and Latino engineers, all submitted major system contributions. All were removed from projects within weeks, all credit transferred elsewhere." The room went still. "Genius was harvested like crops," Sophia said, her voice steady. "Planted by one, picked by another." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silence said everything. Alexandra sat back, crossed her arms, and stared at Hastings like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "You didn't just steal credit," she said. "You built a career out of suppressing the very people who built this company's future." He looked like he wanted to bolt, but there was nowhere left to run. His legacy had just sprung a leak, and the hangar wasn't big enough to hold the truth anymore. Alexandra turned to me, her expression shifting. Not soft, not sentimental. Intent. Marcus, we're offering full retroactive authorship credit, royalties, back pay, and a new position. Director of Innovation, the title you earned 5 years ago. I tilted my head, just slightly. You're serious? Completely, she said. The board doesn't know yet, but they will. I exhaled once. Not in relief, in realism. Do you think they're going to take orders from a black mechanic who used to get escorted off their premises? They won't have a choice, she said without missing a beat. We're not asking for their comfort, we're asking for their compliance. I almost smiled. Almost. Careful, I said. That sounds like a revolution. She leaned forward. It is. I reached down into my bag and pulled out a worn envelope, taped shut, edges frayed. I laid it gently on the desk. You might want to open this, I said. It's the original G7 prototype plans, dated, digitally signed, and that's not all. Alexandra looked at me, eyebrows raised. There's more? I nodded. I have recordings, audio from 5 years ago, Hastings explaining how to erase my name step by step, word for word. She froze for just a moment, then smiled. Slow, sharp. Let's burn the sky down, then. I didn't pull the recordings out right away, not because I was hesitant, but because I knew once I did, there'd be no turning back. Alexandra sat across from me, her fingers laced under her chin, eyes locked on mine like she could already hear the fire building behind my calm voice. 5 years ago, I began, I knew the second Hastings saw my design, he'd try to bury it. Not question it, not improve it, just take it, repackage it, and scrub my name from the system like I was a typo. I pulled a small black flash drive from my coat pocket, the plastic warm from years of being carried like a secret, so I did what anyone in my position would do if they'd grown up watching people like me get erased. I recorded everything. Alexandra took it from my hand gently, like it was a live wire. There are 12 recordings, I continued. Some are conversations, some are voicemails, but the big one, the one that matters, is Hastings laying out the exact steps for reassigning authorship and closing the file quietly. His words, not mine. Her jaw clenched. They thought I was fixing jets, I said. What I was really building was a bomb, and then I dropped the bigger truth. It's not just the G7. Her eyebrows lifted. What do you mean? I leaned forward. Every time I worked on a jet that had an unusual tweak, an undocumented improvement, I flagged it. If I could trace it back to a technician who was no longer at the company, I logged it. Names, timestamps, revisions. I have 5 years' worth of innovation theft. Dozens of engineers. Designs stolen, renamed, and re-signed by the same 3 senior execs. Alexandra sat back like the weight of it was physically shifting the balance of the room. She didn't ask why I kept it all. She already knew. Because people like me don't get second chances. We carry our insurance in the form of truth. After a long pause, she stood and walked to a tall cabinet behind her desk. The lock clicked open, and she pulled out a folder marked with a private stamp, her initials. Inside was a file thicker than anything I'd brought. You're not the only one who's been collecting, she said. For the past 2 years, I've had a private audit team reviewing every complaint that's come through HR, every project handoff, every performance review that ended in sudden termination. I found email chains, deleted ones but not well enough. Threads showing managers conspiring to block promotions, to reassign code authorship before filing patents, to quietly shut down dissent. You were one of many, Marcus. Just the most obvious case they couldn't fully bury. She handed me the file. I opened it. Names, faces, stories that mirrored mine, line for line. We weren't engineers anymore, she said. We were demolition artists. I looked up at her. For the first time, I saw something different in her. Not corporate polish, not moral guilt. Strategy. We sat down again. There was no emotion left in the room. just calculation. "The shareholders' meeting is in 2 weeks," she said. "If we present the evidence there, in full view, the board will be forced to act." Dr. Chun, still silent at the side of the room, finally spoke. "We'll need a legal roadmap. We have to be airtight. We're going up against people who've spent decades mastering the art of plausible deniability." I nodded slowly. "I've kept everything time-stamped, backed up on cloud drives, verified through third-party encryption. I've got originals, and I've got redundancies hidden off-site." Alexandra almost smiled. "So you didn't just survive being erased, you made sure the whole blueprint survived with you." I nodded. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about every kid who thought the system would see their talent and didn't know it was never built for them in the first place." Sophia nodded, firm. "Then let's burn the house clean and build something better." We laid out the plan in silence. No handshakes, no high-fives. Just outlines, documents, recorded statements, backup drives, timelines. Everything would lead to the shareholders' meeting. Alexandra would open the session with a formal announcement. Dr. Chun would introduce the legal breaches. I'd close it with the evidence, recordings, schematics, data trails, and end with the names of every engineer whose work had been stolen. It would be surgical, public, unignorable. That night, as I was leaving the building through the side exit near the executive parking lot, I spotted Hastings pacing near his car. His tie was loose, his phone pressed to his ear. I couldn't hear every word, but I didn't need to. The panic was obvious. His voice rose, cracked, pleaded. "No, we need to lock this down now. I don't care what you have to erase, just do it. Tell Davis to wipe the access logs." I stood in the shadows, arms crossed, watching, listening. Then I turned and walked away. Back in her office, Alexandra watched the security feed and sipped her tea like it was a courtroom transcript. She didn't even flinch. He just made his last unrecorded call. Conference room at Evans Aerospace was a glass box suspended above a city of lies. Every seat at the polished table was taken, every executive buttoned to the throat, every lawyer silent but fully loaded. Cameras were off, but eyes were sharp, sharper than they'd been in years. The tension in that room could have grounded a 747. Alexandra Evans sat at the head of the table, chin high, voice clear. "Before we begin today's financial review, I'd like to address a matter of intellectual property and corporate ethics." She didn't look at Richard Hastings. Not yet. She gestured toward the projection screen behind her, where the G7 schematics appeared. "This system has generated over $400 million in value over the past 5 years. You all know it, you've all celebrated it. But what you didn't know is that it was stolen." She clicked the remote again, and my initials, MJ, flashed in the bottom corner of the blueprint. She nodded to me. I stood, and I played the recording. Hastings' voice echoed through the room like a ghost that finally showed up for its own haunting. "Clean the submission. Reassign the file. The mechanic's name doesn't belong anywhere near this project. No one will believe he built it. Just erase him." Gasps broke the room's silence. One board member dropped his pen. Another adjusted his tie like it had suddenly become a noose. Alexandra let the silence breathe before speaking again. "We have confirmation of authorship, metadata, HR correspondence, and a recorded pattern of behavior that spans multiple departments and at least 7 former employees, all dismissed under false pretenses after making critical contributions." Hastings turned pale. Someone at the table muttered, "Jesus." Another whispered, "This is going public, isn't it?" Alexandra nodded. "It already is." Within minutes, the legal team distributed hard copies of the evidence. Dr. Sophia Chun stepped in and read a statement confirming the internal investigation, the legal findings, and the pending referrals to federal regulators. The board didn't even vote. They didn't have to. Hastings was suspended on the spot. But Alexandra wasn't finished. "This company will not bury its past," she said. "It will fix it. Effective immediately, we're launching a diversity and ethics oversight board. We will review every disputed patent, every misassigned innovation, and every name that was removed from what they built." She turned to me, her voice unwavering. Marcus Jennings will be credited as the lead developer of the G7 system. Effective today, he will serve as Director of Innovation. My name echoed across the room, and this time, it wasn't in a whisper or a sneer. It stuck. The press release went live before we left the room, and by the time I stepped outside, my face was already on the front page of every aerospace journal in the country. I didn't smile, not yet, because this wasn't the end. This was the correction. 2 days later, I sat down for an interview, one of many, but the only one I actually agreed to. They asked the usual, how it felt, what I planned next, if I ever thought this day would come. I didn't want revenge, I told them. I wanted visibility. I wanted the truth to be louder than the silence that buried it for so long. The interviewer asked what advice I'd give to others in my position. I paused before answering. Everyone talks about climbing the ladder, I said, but some of us weren't even told where the building was. We didn't just climb, we built our own stairwell, while being told we didn't belong in the architecture. I wasn't there to inspire. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to draw a line between what was and what would no longer be accepted. It wasn't a ladder I climbed, I said. It was a mountain they told me didn't exist. After the interview, I sat with Alexandra in the quiet wing of her office. No cameras, no board members, just two people who had made a mess for all the right reasons. "What's next?" she asked. I looked out over the city skyline. "I've been thinking about something. A community center in my old neighborhood, a place where kids can learn real engineering, not just in theory but in practice. No gatekeeping, no polished resumes needed, just talent and time." She didn't hesitate. "You build it, I'll fund it. No strings." I nodded. We didn't shake hands. We didn't need to. Across the world, articles were calling it a triumph. Social media turned my story into a banner of resilience. And Richard Hastings? He disappeared like a bad investment. No job, no statements, just a name that quietly faded from the company that used to hang on his every word. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot, because fixing jets was one thing. But rebuilding the launch pad for a new kind of engineer, that was going to take more than tools. That was going to take every ounce of fire they tried to extinguish in me. And lucky for them, I never ran out. 6 months later, Evans Aerospace didn't just look different, it felt different. The air in the executive wing no longer smelled like old money and invisible walls. There were more accents in the boardroom, more natural hair in the labs, and more first-generation college grads running point on next-gen propulsion systems. The polished floor still gleamed, but now the reflection showed something real, an America that actually looked like America. And at the center of it all, somehow, was me, Marcus Jennings, the mechanic they'd tried to erase, now heading a project that would revolutionize fuel efficiency across commercial aviation. My team? Half of them wouldn't have made it past reception 5 years ago. Now, they led meetings, and when I walked into a room, the same men who once rolled their eyes now stood up to shake my hand. Not because I'd changed, but because the ceiling over my head had cracked just enough to let light in. And this time, I was the one holding the switch. But the work I was proudest of wasn't in that skyscraper. It was 10 miles east, in a building that used to be a shuttered grocery store, now reborn as the Jennings Center for Aerospace and Innovation. No glass walls, no marble floors, just rows of workbenches, soldering kits, recycled circuit boards, and a chalkboard covered in formulas written by kids who once thought STEM was just a buzzword for not for you. The center was built in the neighborhood that raised me, the one that taught me how to fix what others threw away. I brought that same spirit into the program. You don't need polished grammar or a prep school tie, I told them. You just need curiosity and a good pair of wire cutters. We were 6 months in when 3 students, 15, 16, and 17, filed their first patent. A lightweight cooling unit for drone battery, efficient, elegant, entirely theirs. When the examiner asked for the lead engineer, the oldest girl pointed to the whole team. "We share credit here," she said. I nearly cried. They handed me broken tools. I built a blueprint anyway. Now, they were drawing their own. One afternoon, Alexandra dropped by the center unannounced, wearing jeans and a hoodie that made her look almost anonymous. She watched a group of teens soldering a custom navigation chip, heads down, tongues poking out the side of their mouths in concentration. If Hastings had just shared credit, she murmured, he'd still be sitting in that director's chair. I didn't laugh. Neither did she. We just smiled. Clear, sober smiles. Not born from bitterness, but from understanding. The past didn't need to be forgotten. It needed to be replaced with something better. We stood side by side, watching the future run its first successful simulation, and I realized something. This wasn't payback. It was pay. A month later, the merger was finalized. My old garage startup, the one I ran in silence for 5 years while fixing jets during the day, was now officially part of Evans Aerospace. Not a side brand, not a footnote, a full-fledged innovation lab with its own budget, its own leadership team, and me at the helm. Alexandra made sure the paperwork reflected exactly what she promised. 30% ownership. I didn't just work for the company, I was the company. My name was on the masthead now, next to hers. And every contract we signed, every new engine prototype we pushed into testing, carried with it a signature they could no longer erase. And yet, when people asked me what my greatest achievement was, it wasn't the board seat or the stock options, or even the G7 retrofit now standard in half the world's private fleets. It was this. Walking into that same hangar from a year ago, watching that same $65 million 0-cents jet lift off into the sky, and knowing it was flying on a system they once said I was too dirty to touch. The difference? This time, I wasn't just there to fix it. I designed it. I owned it. But even more than that, I knew the real lift wasn't coming from turbines. Because now, in a small lab 10 miles from the skyscrapers, there were kids drawing things no one had built yet, and one of them, barely 16, looked up from his prototype last week and asked me, "Mr. Jennings, what does it feel like to fly?" I looked at him and said, "You tell me." Because the jet I once saved now flies on my system, but it's the kids in this lab that are gonna fly higher. 1 year later, the hangar wasn't just a place where jets took off, it had become a stage for something far bigger. The new propulsion system, designed by our team and built with contributions from both our innovation lab and the Jennings Center, was finally ready to launch. 60% fuel efficiency, near silent output, and parts sourced from sustainable alloys developed in-house. The event drew government officials, CEOs, young engineers, retired pilots, and journalists who had once buried stories like mine under business briefs. But the person who mattered most to me sat in the front row, quiet, composed, and wiping tears from her cheeks with a handkerchief she didn't bother to hide. My mother, 72 years old, former night shift custodian, the same woman who'd walked 5 miles in the rain just to clean the lobby of the company that once kicked me out the side door. She never said much in public, but when I caught her eye, she nodded, just once, and that was enough. Her son once repaired jets, now he launches futures. When it was time for the speech, I stepped up to the mic, heart steady, voice clear. I looked across the sea of suits and students, skeptics and believers, and I didn't start with data, I started with truth. True justice isn't one man getting his name back, I said. It's what happens when systems stop rewarding silence and start honoring substance, when talent doesn't need translation to be accepted, when innovation doesn't wear a uniform or a skin tone. I turned toward the students we'd flown in from underfunded schools across the country, many of them standing in the back, wide-eyed, notebooks clutched to their chests. They told me to stay in the garage, I said. So I built the garage into a runway, and then I taught others how to take off. There wasn't a dry eye in the room by then, not even in the corners where emotion usually hides behind spreadsheets. You don't need to be invited through the front door, I continued. Sometimes you build your own door, and sometimes you kick the old one down so nobody else has to ask permission, just to exist. What came next surprised even me. Within 3 months of the launch, 6 other aerospace companies began reevaluating their internal development systems. 2 initiated full-scale innovation equity audits. 1 even reached out to our center to build a mentorship pipeline. It wasn't a trend, it was a shift. Companies realized it wasn't about checking boxes anymore. It was about unleashing brilliance that had been buried under bad policy and worse culture. And you know what happened when they did? Their tech got better, their teams got sharper, the market rewarded what the mirror had denied for too long. My name was now printed not only on systems, but on invitations to panels I used to be locked out of. Only this time, I didn't show up alone. I brought my team. I brought my students. And when I couldn't make it, I sent someone younger, hungrier, and just as capable. But even after the applause faded, after the cameras turned off, I kept going back to that community lab. The chalkboards stayed full, the equipment got better, the questions got harder, and the dreams, they got bigger. I'd sit in the corner and watch them work, watch the spark hit someone mid-sentence, mid-wiring, mid-fail. They didn't know yet how hard it would be. But they also didn't know what couldn't be done, and that ignorance was beautiful because no one had told them no. Not yet, not on my watch. That's when I realized something I hadn't been able to name until then. The greatest victory wasn't surviving the fall, it was standing tall enough to make sure others didn't have to fall in the first place. It wasn't just about reclaiming stolen credit, it was about clearing the path forward so others could walk through without having to bleed to prove they belonged. And if you're still listening, still holding on through every twist, every fire, every fight, then maybe you're part of that future too. Maybe you've been doubted or dismissed or deleted. Maybe no one's seen what you've been building in silence. But trust me, someone will. If this story of dignity, justice, and surprise touched you, subscribe and follow, because we've only just begun burning down the walls, and the next door we kick open might just be yours.